All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Modjeska Simkins School for Human Rights. This evening, of course, we're having one of our deeper dive discussions with what I think is essentially an all-star panel of folks who've been involved in activism and social justice and fighting for genuine change in South Carolina and the country and the entire world for decades, really. And I'm really excited to get today's program underway. I think everyone's in for a treat this evening. And what I'll do is I'll introduce our speakers first in the order in which they'll speak, and giving them, of course, short bios. Now, I know for a lot of you who've been in the Modjeska School this semester, you've been asking the last few weeks, well, what do we do with this historical knowledge we've learned so far? How do we apply it to the world as it is in 2021? Well, I think today's Modjeska School deeper dive will certainly help us get closer to an answer for that particularly important question. So I'm going to again introduce folks in the order in which they're going to speak. And again, they're going to talk for about 20 to 25 minutes or so and talk a bit about their experiences in activism, and in particular, how those experiences line up with the current question that is before us this evening, talking about identity politics and what that term means for activists, for engaged citizens in the here and now. So I want to start off, of course, with Mandy Carter, who's been involved in activism for decades. And of course, Mandy Carter's waving at the camera right now. She's been involved in many different activities as an activist, among other things. She is the co-founder of Southerners on New Ground, or SONG, which was founded in 1993. It's been a home for LGBTQ activism and liberation for many, many years. And Mandy Carter has been involved in many other social justice and freedom initiatives. And really, she is the kind of person who, when we talk about people who are fighting for freedom, we're talking about folks like Mandy Carter. For one, next up is, of course, Harriet Hancock, another legend in the field of social justice and human rights activism here in South Carolina. Harriet Hancock, she's been involved for many years in activism in South Carolina and across the country, in particular fighting again for LGBTQ activism. She was the founder for the Columbia chapter of the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, which was the first PFLAG chapter right here in the Palmetto State. She's really been on the forefront for LGBTQ activism for many years. And of course, she is still a force for justice and social change in South Carolina right now as we speak. Next up after that, I don't think he's on the call quite yet, but we do also have this evening Kevin Alexander Gray, who is from South Carolina, a Spartanburg native. At one point, he served in the U.S. Army and went from doing that to being the executive director of the Carolina Peace Resource Center in the 80s at the height of the Cold War. He was also Jesse Jackson's South Carolina campaign manager in his 88 campaign for president. He's also been a president of the ACLU right here in South Carolina. And if you know Kevin Gray for anything, it might be for one of two things. One, his commentary on various national radio programs, his writings posted by Counterpunch and elsewhere, or you may know him as the co-owner of the Railroad Barbecue right here in Columbia, South Carolina.
Or showing up late.
And then also we have on the call in one of our current Modjeska School students, Robert-John Hinojosa, who is actually been serving for some time in public health. He's also part of SONG right now, SONG Power. He's also worked on several different political campaigns, and he's been with Southerners on New Ground for the last 20 years or so, and also currently working with REN as well. And of course, Brett will also give some comments as well. So again, this evening, they'll all be speaking about their experiences in activism, how that relates to identity politics. And in the second half of our program, we'll be doing a Q&A where I'm sure many of you have something to say and something to ask about what all this means for your particular brand of social justice in 2021. So without further ado, I want to shut up now and get to Mandy Carter, who will kick us off this evening.
Great. Well, first of all, I bring you greetings from Durham, North Carolina, Mandy Carter, she, her, hers. And I also want to say with Southerners on New Ground, founded in 1993, we're in our 27th year. I want to make sure I bring the other co-founders into the room. Mab Segrist, Suzanne Farr, Pat Hussein, Pam McMichael, and the late great Joan P. Garner. I feel like it's old home week. I know you, Harriet. I know you, Robert John. I know you, Kevin. So glad to be here with you all. I think I love this title, Dr. Greene, and also Brett and the folks that are putting this on. The idea that we're talking about picking allies, identity politics, and really trying to talk in practical terms of where it's happened and what might be coming up that we can actually be engaged in. But also this idea about how we start looking at winning some practical goals. So I only have a 20-minute window. I'm going to speak pretty informally, if that's okay with you. But I did make some notes just to keep on track in terms of what we're talking about. I would like to say that I do appreciate the invitation. Home is North Carolina. I was born and raised in upstate New York, 2 orphanages and a foster home, but made my way to San Francisco in 1967, Summer of Love, but moved to Durham, North Carolina in 1982 to join what? The War Resisters League. And now we're going to be, I think, like 100 years old in 2023, founded by 3 women. But I mention that because when I think about the idea of the connections I have here, and even though I'm in North Carolina, I have some very concrete, specific connections to South Carolina, which I want to just briefly say before I get into my perceptions of what we might talk about common allies. I moved to Durham, North Carolina in 1982. Brett and Becky, you might remember this, but there was a huge nonviolent civil disobedience action at the Savannah River Power Plant, if anyone remembers that back that far. But I remember we were down there to talk about what it meant to have a southern state, South Carolina. We have the same kind of stuff happening in North Carolina. But the idea of committing acts of nonviolent civil disobedience to really focus in on what we might call the military industrial complex, but what you have in your own backyard. What we have in our own backyard, really important. The War Resisters League always puts offices where there's going to be military installations. I live in Durham. I am 2 hours away from every major military base in North Carolina. Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune, Cherry Point, Seymour Johnson. But they also have in Fayetteville is the Quaker House. So the idea of having a militarism and sort of like the number of the things that might be there, but also having a counter activity or a counter organization would be critical. And of course, Brett and Becky, you're thinking about the South Carolina Progressive Network when you think about what you might have in your respective state. But also another one that I would say that we have a relationship with the North Carolina Organization for Women. I'm a lifetime member, but you have South Carolina Now. You also have the South Carolina ACLU. You just talked about that, Dr. Greene. You also have the South Carolina AFL-CIO, Jennifer. You also have the Poor People's Campaign. You might have a South Carolina branch of that as well. But I might also say that for me, what I would like to maybe take 2 examples of where you would practically think about how you start talking about the idea of building allies and who that could be. One of them would be South Carolina Pride. 1989, there had been conversation about having to do a South Carolina gay, lesbian, and I don't think we had the word bisexual or transgender back in 1989, but a South Carolina Pride, because we had been doing them in North Carolina. I remember getting an invite, Harriet, and some of the crew down there to come down and have a conversation about what it would mean to start doing an LGBT Pride in South Carolina. And you did your first one in 1990. That was 31 years ago. And I do have the dates for this one coming up, October 22nd to the 23rd, down there in Columbia. What I thought was interesting, and this gets to you, Harriet Hancock, when you think about pride, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender non-conforming, but that A for allies has to be critical as well. I also think in terms of when you think about our community, and that first one was tough as it was here in North Carolina. We decided to have a pride, and the first reaction we got back was some of the church community. The first reaction we got back is some of the community thinking this is not a great idea about being very visible, being very vocal about protecting the rights of the LGBTQ community. But Harriet, when you think about yourself and South Carolina PFLAG and some other organizations that were so critical, without having our straight allies to understand that we have to be in partnership, there are some really practical things we have in common in terms of why this would be relevant to all of our lives. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I can tell you here, when we had it in Durham, we had some allies that wore bags over their head because they were so worried about being seen. That was the very first one we had. We also had some people who would write checks to the Pride that we were going to do, but they didn't want anyone to know where their check was from. They didn't want any mail, almost like, I don't want to be outed, because even as a straight ally, I sometimes could feel like I could be the target. And here's the best example, PFLAG. Parents and friends of lesbians and gays. It wouldn't be until the parents of a gay son, the parents of a lesbian daughter, or the parents of a trans person, when they had their own friends start, I don't want to be around you, that might be the first time they really felt like that's what it feels like to be told, but not you. So you find that you have that kind of in common about what we have in common in terms of attitude, people's expressions about what that might be. But then we also have a thing called the practical thing, it's called the law. If you remember, I'm not a lawyer, but I know there was this thing called, crimes against humanity, homosexuality, and how we had to look at that, particularly in the South, on the books. But how did that get challenged? Some lawyers had to finally say, we might want to challenge what this law means. But there used to be a law against interracial marriage. Remember that. And if you think about how that had to be challenged also in the courts as well. So this notion, I think, about changing of hearts and minds, changing of public policy, changing of laws, changing about how people might think about whatever that might be, I think we have like a commonality of what that might be. But the other one I want to talk about is what we did here, and I'll wrap this up in terms of a very practical thing that might be relevant to in South Carolina. Here in North Carolina, we have a lot of rural. And in the eastern part of North Carolina, we have a Mount Olive pickle boycott, cucumbers. All those crops were being picked by farm workers. And at one point, some people who were out there, out in Mount Olive, started complaining about the housing, working conditions, what was happening in terms of just manual labor. We had an Immaculata Catholic Church here in Durham, not far in North Carolina, held a meeting. And they called together the community and they asked a simple question: who can we bring together to become allies in terms of how they might start impacting and creating a union in Mount Olive, North Carolina? Southerners on New Ground showed up at that meeting. Even though we're LGBTQ, we said one thing we might have in common: we understand about inequality and justice. So we decided to join in terms of the actual organizing of the event. What we literally did, we did a march from Mount Olive, North Carolina, and it's literally located at the corner of Cucumber and Vine, I kid you not. And we literally did a walk from Mount Olive, North Carolina to the state capitol in Raleigh. And all along the line of the march, we had to have these evening town hall meetings. All of them were in Spanish. For the first time in my life, I had to put a headset on to hear Spanish into English, which is really a game changer. But Robert-John, if you remember with Southerners on New Ground, we talked about language justice, or the Highlander Center would be important. Now, we ended up getting to Raleigh, but here's the part that I'll end with in terms of how we talk about individual participation in the changing of hearts and minds as well. We were asking people, when they had decided to do a boycott to start the union, they got one in 5 years, if you would go to the store and you would not buy a Mount Olive pickle product, like the jars of pickles and whatever that might be, it means that I can remove my personal participation. But what happens when you have the entire University of North Carolina system joining that boycott? That was a game changer. So individual, you understand how you can remove your complicity, but also be supportive. But when you collectivize that and understand how the impact that would have, that was a game changer. But also it was faith-based, it was socially done, it was Black, brown, poor, white, thinking about all the connected communities to figure out why that would be so important to have this influence on Mount Olive, North Carolina. Same thing you might also say with Pride. And then the only thing I'll end with in terms of, I love this statement. Do you have a Poor People's Campaign down there? it's like, it's like it started in 1968, but it's about economic justice, housing, food justice, whatever. But there's a great quote: forward together, not one step back. Forward together, not one step back. That's where we are now. We'll talk later about 2021 and 2022, but the changing of hearts and minds and the changing of public policy, and being in unity from North Carolina to y'all in South Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Manny. That was excellent. Thank you so much. All right, next up is Harriet Hancock, and then after that, Kevin Gray, and then Robert-John.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be asked to participate in this wonderful event here, and certainly good to see all of you, and especially Mandy Carter, my dear friend. My son came out as gay to me, and when he was about 19 years old. We had moved to Columbia after my husband's death. I have 3 children. And when my son came out to me, it was a shock, but I certainly didn't turn away from him because I had had gay friends when I was in high school and knew gay people, and I did not ever think that anybody chose to be gay. So of course my heart was flipping around because I kept thinking, what's going to happen to my wonderful, beautiful son at the hands of society? Will he be killed? He'll be discriminated against. He won't be allowed to enter into the mainstream of life. And that just, floored me. I kept trying to put on a happy, smiley face like I was dealing with everything until I finally got to the point when I said to him, I need you to help me. I need you to help me. He gave me a book, what every parent needs to know about homosexuality, and it helped me a lot. He introduced me to some of his friends, which I wanted to meet his friends. I wanted to see the people that were surrounding him. I wanted to know about this other family that they call family that's not blood family. Because as many of you know, the community, they say he or she is family, meaning they are LGBTQIA, whatever. And so he introduced me to friends, and it happened that they would say, what can you help my mother? My mother and my father don't accept me, and you accept Greg so readily, and you meet with us and you accept us. How can you help my parents do that? And I thought, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. And I need some help here. And I had nowhere to go, nowhere to look. This is South Carolina in, 1981 and 82. But I did happen to listen to, I think they used to have, and it was a real sort of conservative network that they would have some daytime show. It was 3 guys, I can't remember. Bill Benton, I think, was one of them. And they were talking to Amy Ashworth, who was in New York, who had helped found Parents of Gays at that time. And she was talking about having 2 gay sons and how they were supporting their sons. And of course, it was a call-in show. So there were people calling in and just telling her everything, that she was a spawn of the devil and she was doing wrong by her kids for not straightening them out. And boy, they were just beating up on her. And I was driving in the car coming home from school. I'd started the University of South Carolina. When I was 18, I got married, never had a chance to go. So after my husband passed away, I did. But anyway, so I couldn't get home quick enough to get to the telephone to call, to be connected to this, to talk to this woman. And when I called, I remember saying, put me through. I want to speak to this woman. I have a positive comment. I think the person said, good, I'll put you right in. So I said, I support what this woman's doing. I have a gay son, and I want to know more about her organization, because we need such an organization here. So that was the very beginning of reaching out to someone to try to figure out how to achieve this, how to help basically other parents and other family members and friends to understand their gay child and accept them with love and pride, instead of just kicking them out the door and being against them. And I just knew that there had to be change, and I didn't know how to do it, but I was going to try. So I started a PFLAG group in Columbia. They sent me this box that sat on my dining room table forever that said how to start a group. And I kept looking at it and saying all the things that they say do, I can't do in South Carolina. It's just not possible. But finally, I said to my son, I've started this group, and in order to get some publicity so people will know that we're here, you are my gay son. I have 3 children. They know that Karen and Jennifer are not lesbians, so you're going to be it. Can you afford to be out of the closet? Well, he was out to some extent, among friends and other people. He never hid it. But to be the poster boy for gay rights in South Carolina was a scary thing, but he said that he would do it. And he talked with his partner at the time, and luckily they allowed me to do that. So I got publicity. I knew the first thing I had to do was get some publicity, find out who could help us. So I did an article for the old Record newspaper. Dottie Ashley did an article. And of course, from that, PFLAG started growing. And from there, I, would go to bars and give out my information about PFLAG to all the people there. Say, if you have problems with your parents, here's some information. Here's my phone number. Call me. And we had regular meetings. But then at that time, PFLAG was mostly just to claim to be a support group for parents, and they didn't want to be advocates. And I said, I'm going to be an advocate. And that's the only way to change things. We can't stay with PFLAG behind closed doors. You've got to change hearts and minds, and people have to know that there's a problem. So we did that, but luckily, I just felt like it was time to come out of the closet into Main Street, and I sort of organized that. And I was lucky to have Mandy Carter as my mentor. Couldn't have done it without her. She came and helped us start First Pride. She's been back so many times. But I think the thing that I realized is you've got to have publicity. You want it to be good publicity, but sometimes, even things like the PFLAG group, I remember when Giuliani came to town. Of course, Giuliani's always been he's always been accepting of gay people. But when he came down here, and he was, I don't know who he was coming to see and raise money for, but where they were having this big fundraiser for him, we went and picketed outside the residents saying, "Welcome to Columbia, Mayor Giuliani. Thank you for all you do for gay people." And, it was just like one of these things. Of course, that got in the newspaper, and that shocked a lot of people. So we tried to find innovative ways to get publicity, trying to find people who we could, Progressive Network. I was one of the early members of Progressive Network, and we, really benefited greatly from that relationship. And I think the most important things are to find your allies, to get the publicity that you need, and also to find out what they're doing on a national level and how they could help us nationally. So that's how I proceeded. So that's my time.
Thank you so much for that, Harriet Hancock. Again, I hope folks are taking some good notes, because you're getting a lot of good on the ground firsthand information about what it means to be an activist right here in South Carolina. Next, we'll go to Kevin Gray, who has just joined us. And after that, Robert-John. So Kevin, please take it away.
Unmute. Oh, I think am I?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, sir.
I could have waited a while and just listened to everybody, because there are a lot of people on this workshop that I have not seen in a long time. Mandy, I don't think we've spoken since when Bruce Springsteen decided not to play in South Carolina. In North Carolina, and it was Mandy that was instrumental in aiding with Bruce Springsteen and that group to boycott South Carolina over the I think it was the same-sex bathroom stuff, Mandy. But and Harriet, I don't know when the last time I saw you. So I'm kind of coming into this kind of code. South Carolina, the ideological home of white supremacy in America. Where do you start? And how do you talk about what's going on now? I have tried to keep my head down for not seeming like an old codger. I have a problem with the whole identity, the whole conversation about identity politics and what's a movement, and Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And maybe it's because I'm an old codger and I don't want to get myself in any trouble. But for me, it's always been about not having a hierarchy of oppression, suffering. material than virtual. We're out meeting one another and talking to people. I'm doing this Zoom thing. I did Zoom court a couple of weeks ago. I'm not good on the Zoom stuff. But it's time for us to get back in the neighborhoods and get back in the streets and get back with people and talk to people and find out what their needs are and meet people where they are. And that's always been how I've looked at organizing. You meet people where they are. You understand that our movement is about human rights, individual human rights, and how do we make that manifest? It's how do you fight white male patriarchy? How do you fight white supremacy and racism as in structural racism? What is lasting? How to recognize the problems and really solve the problems instead of just talking about them. What can you do? It's not just about marching because the police killed George Floyd or anybody. Because since the beginning of this country, when Africans were kidnapped and brought here, and the genocide of Native Americans, it's always been about fighting white supremacy, fighting racism, fighting genocide, fighting misogyny, fighting sexism, fighting for the expansion of human rights. And so how to having connections with one another, to building neighborhoods and neighborhood networks, to stand up strong against the problem, to put resource to it, and not just be marching in the streets, but going to the meetings. And we got to be clear about what it is that we're trying to do. We can't, it's not about just being pissed off because Donald Trump's in office or some Republicans in office. It could be anybody that's in office. I remember when we had to organize here in Columbia, I have this restaurant, people come in and look at the walls and they see all the posters, and I had an interesting conversation. Well, do you have something about Barack Obama? Of course I do. And then, well, you have to love Barack Obama. I said, yeah, you know, I guess you can love Barack Obama. But I remember picketing the township when the organizers of the South Carolina campaign decided to bring in a homophobic preacher to do a tour of South Carolina for Barack Obama to bring the churches together. You have to fight the fight and be consistent about fighting the fight. The fight's about human rights regardless of who's in power. As I said, here in South Carolina, we just have the particular distinction of being the ideological home of white supremacy in America, which is the foundation of this country and what this country believes in. So I do believe that we have a responsibility to be at the forefront of any fight as it relates to anyone's rights, be they gay, be they bisexual, be they transgender, be they Latino, be they black. To where people live in a society that is
All right, folks.
Did we just lose Kevin?
I think we did, unfortunately. He had kind of a weak connection. No, I think everyone's had the same issue with Kevin's connection. Unfortunately, this is the age of Zoom where sometimes Wi-Fi just isn't as reliable as we want it to be. Hopefully, Kevin can get back on. I'm sure he'll be trying his best to get back on. But we do want to keep the program moving smoothly. So we'll go ahead to Robert-John and get some of your thoughts about activism and identity politics in the here and now. So Robert-John, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Greene. I appreciate 100% the time to be here, especially to see and talk to Mandy, see Miss Harriet, hear Kevin, the portions we did here. I met Kevin when I was a little shorty in '88 when he was running Jesse Jackson's campaign. So that's the first time I met him. So yeah. So yeah, I too have, maybe I too am an old codger because I too have a lot of thoughts around the concept of identity politics and I don't even know that's a real thing. I think it becomes created by Western ideology to talk about how people pit themselves. And I think it's just really more about divide and conquer politics. But what I really do think is like what Mandy Carter leaned into around allies. Like, I think what we're really talking about is relational organizing, this 101. How do I break bread with you? How do I build relationship with you? How do I get to spend time with you? And also understanding the levels of privileges that we have. Brett talked a little bit earlier about some of those identifying your privileges, and you should always speak with an authentic voice. And I think coming into spaces, I have lots of different privileges, being the G in the LGBTQIA plus, and that sometimes the G's have sometimes issues with T's or L's, or sometimes we have issues with B's because we don't think they're real, right? Like there's all kind of ways that those intersections of battling each other turn out. But it's our responsibility to show up and help build those bridges, right? Create those relationships about how we build this movement. And and I think it's okay. Like I will be 100%. I find it suspicious when I find straight people who involve themselves into queer organizing that they want to control it, where they want to lead it. Like I think about James Baldwin and Malcolm X talking about the suspicions of the white person coming in to then organize for Black people. Like I think there is places where the ally has, but the ally doesn't have to show up at every barbecue, every spade game, every pride, right? There are places where they're supportive, and that's the same for leading with or your privileges. I don't have to show up. You know, there's not. I'm not just because I'm pretty, sparkly, and queer doesn't mean I have to show up in all the sparkly queer spaces, right? There should be made spaces for other folks, and it's my responsibility to lift up other voices and other folks that don't get the privileges and platforms that I get. Like everybody hears about Robert-John. All these people in this class have heard about Robert-John, right? We talk all the time. So it's giving the opportunity to have other voices. There's a lot of dope people in this school. There's Kayla, there's Melissa, there's Commander Pickles. Like there's a lot of really fierce fire. Deborah Billings. There's just a lot of people who bring that heat. Shaterica. Like there's so many folks that are coming up in this movement that are fire, that have that in their belly, and they're making moving. And it's not just about move for the sense of pleasure, the sense of just self. It is about building for community, about beloved community. And all these folks are the mycelium. They're connecting all of this together and looking about how to abolish some of this bullshit systems and how to build a life that is free from fear, that has liberation in our lifetime. And that's part of the things that song talks about is liberation in a lifetime, connecting all of our intersectional communities and building forward, like everything Mandy said, right? Like, so those are the things that I think about. And I think what happens is when folks push back around identity politics, or when they bring that up, the same thing when they bring up about critical race theory. And I watch all these little videos of folks crying and say, I'm not racist, I just don't want that to be taught. It gives me the same energy that people with picket signs. It's like, I don't believe in integration, but I believe in Jesus. Like, I don't want them in my school. It's that same energy. And it's until we're able or willing to identify the supremacy and patriarchal senses that are happening in our communities, how we were built, a nation was built on stolen land and built by stolen people, we'll always come to this nexus of not understanding. We have to be willing to listen, and we have to be willing to come in with an open heart if we want to keep this. Because organizing is about relationship, and it's about family. It's about building. My community is as healthy as I am, and I am as healthy as my community. So it is imperative for us to come forward and do that work. And I just think it's happening already. Like I said, I see it in this class. I hear it in the discussions. I see where people, Amber comes to mind too. I see these people bringing this fire, wanting to question the system and wanting to figure out how they can make material changes happen in their community. And I think this is the spot. Like, you have a pantheon of like great folk up here who are sharing their knowledge and dropping science, right? So I think it's imperative to us to take that, to build with it. And I'm just grateful and blessed that I'm able to spend this time and be in these kind of spaces, and that I'm also learning. And I get thrown about as being this organizer just because I've been around for a long time. I'm 45, whiskey and weed, that's what keeps all this nice. But yeah, and I've been doing it for a minute, but I've been doing it because it's something that I believe in, and it's something, but I also have a lot of privileges that allow me to do this work too. So being real where it comes from, and being real that I see it already. I see those seedlings sprouting, and I see these people coming through here in this space, and I just want to uplift them as well and figure out all the ways that we can be supported. For me, for my elder community who have paved the way for me to be in the space, and me to make room for younger folks so they can come through and replace me and do the magical work that has to happen. So that's what I'm feeling, and that's what I think this identity is about our movement forward and about us doing it, and you know, and sliding off those haters, because there's always going to be people that are going to try to undermine us. There's always going to be people who are going to can question you. You are valid and amazing as you are. Do what you do. So yeah, I think, you know, I've had enough time on my soapbox, but that's the pieces that I wanted to share, and I'm thankful again for the time and space that you allowed me to have.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Robert John. Greatly appreciate it. So, Brett, you want to add your 2 cents as well?
Well, I hope I can hold myself to 2 cents. Following Robert John is a tough act to follow. And I'm so glad he's back in South Carolina, and we're going to keep him here. We're going to revoke his passport for crossing state lines to incite liberation. Yeah, I think I've got a different kind of take on this, because some of you may have noticed that I'm a white male American, cisgendered, middle class guy. And when you cook that down, that's kind of the people that are causing the problems in this world. I could have been one of them. I was raised well, however, and actually believed in the stuff they taught me in Sunday school. I had a perfect attendance record in Sunday school, living on military bases, integrated military bases in the segregated South, going to Beaufort High School and dropping off the black kids at the Fallen Down School and the white kids at the other school. And so this is contradictions. Vietnam, I'm living on Parris Island. There were like 17,000 young men about my age chanting "kill" at dawn. And I'm having this discussion with my commander Navy father about, isn't it the same problem that we overthrew King George because of colonialism? The Vietnamese are trying to fight the French colonial movement. We're just stepping in for the French. And it was not a comprehensive conversation with my father. I ended up, by the time I was 22, in the state prison because I believed those good things about this country and the things that you believe in. And they were lies. And Kevin Gray's right. They will kill you in a heartbeat and steal your stuff. And that I was in the Southern Student Organizing Committee, my first protest in 1966 at the University of Georgia, when a white racist, stone cold white racist, Klan loving, ignorant fool, Lester Maddox, was elected governor. And I marched with the Southern Organizing Committee there at University of Georgia, and SOC left SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that Mandy was working with in '64, because there was this discussion about, y'all white folks come down here to Mississippi to help us out. You know what would be best? Y'all go work on white students where the problem is. It made all the sense in the world to me. And so that is a separation and identification that was incumbent at the time for people to have their own leadership in space. And we need to understand that incumbency at certain times when people need to find their place and their power. But it's a circle, it goes around, but it's different every time it comes around. And so we got to be patient with people that don't see the long struggle. They don't see who was in it before they got in it. And they think they just discovered reality and oppression. You grew up during Obama, all of a sudden Trump comes along and you, God, my God, how did this happen? But I had the opportunity to challenge the privilege that I had. Firstly, in recognizing that the war in Vietnam was against brown people. Following up on the things that I was studying about W.E.B. Du Bois and Modjeska Simkins being involved in a Pan-Africanist movement against colonialism 70 years earlier. And that in 1970, 71 or 2, I can't remember, I would have been in really, it would have been very, very bad to be in the state prison when you're a young, cute little white guy and you're walking down the tunnel. You've just been introduced to prison and there's no prison one-on-one. There's no, hey, we're glad you're here. And They shaved my head, gave me a uniform, first offense misdemeanor for spray painting held oil and go on the draft board wall. My co-defendant was a slut agent. And I'm like trying to be invisible, and people are coming up behind me, grabbing my butt, yelling, "Fresh meat!" And so it's like, uh-oh. So I get to the ward where I'm going to stay with 100 men, where they close the door at night. They don't come back until daytime to clean the bodies up. And I see somebody I knew in jail. And he said, "Hey, you want to go to lunch?" I said, "Sure." And we went back down the tunnel, and I got in line, I got my tray, and we sat down, and somebody walked up beside me. And he said, "Boy, you're not going to last long here." And I looked up, and there were like 1,200 men looking at me. And I'd been in prison for like an hour. And I just went through the black line and sat down on the black side of the cafeteria because I was raised well. It saved my body and my soul. I would not have made it. I mean, there were people that told me that they were going to kill me when I got in there because that's the boy that burned the flag. I've been beaten up in police custody after burning the Confederate flag in 1969. So this privilege thing comes with tremendous responsibility. And I've had the opportunity to challenge that, had the opportunity to be in the Second Decennial World Conference on Racism in 1984. I went with American Indian Treaty Council NGO status with my friends from North Carolina who had their friends killed by the Klan and Nazis. And it was about genocide. It was about police off the chain. There were 130 something countries there. This is a world conference on racism. I was the only white male American at that conference because the United States, South Africa, and Israel boycotted it. The privilege comes with responsibility. Being in a refugee camp in El Salvador and having a little 2-year-old kid naked clinging to my leg and finding out that his parents were killed by bombs my government gave him. That's why I've been doing what I've been doing. And the good news is they said they were going to make an example out of me, and I hope they did. It just wasn't what they expected. But I really do believe that what we have to do is we don't pick our allies, we pick our enemies. And then I have been over and over again castigated for appropriating a civil rights hero, Ms. Simkins, who I was her last colleague because of an ideological tie we had. If you called her a civil rights activist, she would correct you and say, "I'm a human rights activist." Civil rights are what the man Granson can take away. Human rights are what you came with. And so there's an ideological level of comradeship that we need to appreciate we can find in everybody and to not cancel people right off the bat. And so, Robert, that's about all I need to say right now. I would love to see some conversations crank up here. Take issue with me or anybody else. Or
Definitely, Brett. I totally agree with you there. Thanks so much for that, by the way. I really appreciate that. And I want to say on behalf of the folks here this evening, I know we all appreciate the points of view that we've gotten so far this evening. And now I think is really the best part of our Modjeska School events, which is the Q&A portion. And so I want to encourage folks, if you have any questions, to please put them in the chat as we go forward. And what I'll do is I'll kick us off with some questions right now to the panelists overall. And one question I really want to ask, and I think a lot of you already alluded to this in your brief remarks this evening, but if you could all talk a bit about what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in activism during the course of your careers and your lives as activists? And any one of you can start us off with that answer.
Well, this is Mandy, and I will go back to what I said earlier. I've really been intrigued, and what I appreciated, but also all the folk being on here, is sort of the age range, but also geography as well. I remember when I joined the War Resisters League back in, we did nonviolent civil disobedience at the Oakland Induction Center in California in 1967. What was I, 19? And I remember when I joined the War Resisters League, and I put the link in the site, there had been this conversation about how do you make change in this society, the only one I know where my people came from. And there has been this ongoing conversation, and I'll throw it out to everyone. When I said about the changing of hearts and minds in public policy, it really made a difference with those marches and the parades and the jail no bail, and the idea of the lunch counter sit-ins, and how you'd really try to impact people's passions or a sense of what would be called fair. But also the importance of changing of public policy. The vote matters. I mean, it literally matters. And I'm sitting here behind you. You might be able to see the Obama pride and, you know, Biden, Harris, whatever. I thought I would never, this is just me, I don't want to create a controversy, but in 2008, when you had Hillary Clinton, the white woman, running against Barack Obama, a black man, I had said at that point, there is no way this country would ever elect a black man, son of an interracial marriage. I'm glad I was wrong. That was in 2008. I have no doubt we're about ready to elect the first woman president who's a woman of color, and also a woman. But we didn't get the right to vote as for women until 1918 in this country, and black folk, we came here as property. So if you think about where it was then, where we are now, and in our lifetime, I'm just stunned by this in a really kind of creative way, but a kind of an interesting kind of way, because I have a lot of friends who say, don't worry, the vote don't matter, nothing's going to change. Oh yeah, it does. And we have the name Jesse Helms, just give you an idea about how important that is. Y'all have Strom Thurmond down there, we have Jesse Helms. Just remember this, they count on the fact that we can sit here and moan and groan or go out into the streets, Kevin, you said it, yell and scream. But if you ain't pulling that lever in terms of the right to vote, this is me, I just wonder, like, at what point does change really happen? So that's just me thinking about the power of the vote. Practically speaking, in South Carolina, November 2nd, 2021, you have the municipal election in Columbia, South Carolina. What y'all gonna do about it? That's your mayor and your city council. We have 5 cities here in North Carolina, but the municipals in November 2021. But to me, 2022 is gonna be pivotal. But that goes down, you said it, Brett, as well. That's your soil and water, that's your county commissioners, that's city council, that's your school board. How do we get the information, know what that information is relevant, and then act on it? You can vote at the age of 18, but also one other final thing. There's also this notion about, this is my hope and why I'm excited. I'm a baby boomer born in 1948. There's like 74 million of us between 1946 and 64. 18 to 35-year-olds are going to outnumber us pretty soon. I want to be a part of that multi-generational mix in terms of hearts and minds and the vote. So that's me. Hearts and minds, public policy. I'll pass it on. Robert-John, what do you think?
I'm nervous to follow behind you, Mandy Carter. I agree. I think for me, I am thinking, I think I lost track of what the actual question was because I read a different question about like next steps. So maybe I'll just talk about that. But for me, I am thinking too in the scope of policy. You know, I think a lot about what it looks like, how we move from one space to another. In my role, in my job, I think more, I have a lot of statistical information I go through and a lot of data. So I think a lot about the way we utilize the information we have to move forward, right? And I agree, we turn up on the streets, that's all important. And we show up in prides, that's all important. But then the conditional material change isn't just gonna happen if we're marching or parading, right? Like we have to do an actionable thing. So pulling the lever, like that's 100% part, moving policy, legislation, like the FAIR Act, right? Like saying, hey, gerrymandering is destroying our state. It is a racist conceptual idea. We need to destroy it. So organize around those things that can make material change happen. And that's what I think next steps looks like. It is that same energy you take and you take it to move. For us as Southerners on New Ground, we were a C3, you know, doing our political education. We're amazing at it. We then bumped it up, C4 PAC, and looking at what we can do within the electoral process. How can we disrupt the system? How can we disrupt? And one of the things is I never self-identify as an activist because it's not something I'm trying to activate. I'm an abolitionist. I'm trying to deconstruct the system. I'm trying to deconstruct patriarchy. I'm trying to deconstruct racism in the systems that we're here so that we can be on new ground, on hollow ground. Southerners on new ground, so we can be on hollow ground, right? So yeah, like building a new South, right? The South got something to say. What's up, Outcast? So we have something to say, and we're gonna make it happen. We'll bring that fire. So that's what I'm thinking for me is like policy is the shift change, is dynamics of power have to be brought back into communities. There's no more space and time of waiting for somebody else to bring you deliverance, or somebody else is gonna bring you to that water. We're gonna bring it, and we'll dig a new well if we need to, but we can make it happen. So I'm all about using our community power to make that happen. So that would be the way I answer that question.
Oh, thanks so much. And really quickly, I just wanted to reiterate the original question, because there are some great questions in the chat. But for those who haven't responded yet, my original question was about what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in activism over the last few decades? And I think if you want to answer that or get into next steps for activism and activists, that's totally fine. But we've got plenty of time to get to the other questions. So the rest of the panelists are more than welcome to chime in on what have you seen in terms of changes in activism over the years.
Well, I can make an observation on that. And one of the things is, but multiple things, but one is that South Carolina is drawing more attention now than it has in the last 50 years outside the state. We've been flyover country. We don't have enough electoral votes for anybody to consider. They think we're all as stupid as the people that run the show have set out to make us. And there's more attention coming now because those of us that have been organizing in the South have been telling people in the North, y'all, as long as we start sending stupid legislators like Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond to Washington, we're the anchor. And if you go back in history, this country wouldn't have been started as a slave economy if it hadn't been for the South Carolina delegation having more money than anybody else. And now we're seeing that being understood in part because the stuff that was bad about the South isn't going away, it's metastasizing. We've got more and more countries in the North that were union countries passing right to work acts. We've got the Boogaloo Boys as bad in Michigan as they are in anywhere else. And so the changes, there's hopefully more money, more enthusiasm, more energy coming to South Carolina that we desperately need.
Thanks. And Harriet, please go right ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I'm going to address the LGBTQ issue because that's the area that I've been working in. And the changes that I've seen, well, for one thing, I think we all know that we finally achieved gay marriage, and which is something that most gay people didn't believe would ever happen in their lifetime. When I used to have clients in my law practice doing their documents to protect each other, they'd say, when do you think we're ever going to get married? I said, certainly not in my lifetime and probably not in yours. How pleasantly surprised I am to still be alive and we have gay marriage. So that's one big issue, but that just didn't happen in a vacuum. It took a lot of work, and it took more people being able to try to come out and be who they are to educate other people, because you've got to tell the stories. And when gay people tell their stories, I mean, they're human beings, and other people they begin to understand. It's not just that they go away and not listen to anything that's being said. So I think that the gay people I think it's been a smart movement. Mandy, I'll tell you that. Mandy's one of the smartest people I know. I'll just say that right now. But we've had some great people working in this initiative, United States overall, and certainly in South Carolina, North Carolina. So I see a lot of changes happening, more groups. You know, we were scared to death to have that first march in Columbia. Now they have marches all over. They have PFLAG groups all over. And I think it's just a matter of education, and people speaking out and telling their stories. And I see that that's created a lot of change. I think we can all see where that's happened. That's it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. All right. So we've got a bunch more questions in the chat here. And I also see some hands raised as well. So let's see what we can get to first. So let me actually I know that this was a question put in the chat about 10 minutes ago from Jennifer Clyburn Reed. And this is a question Robert John's already alluded to. But the question is, where does activism need to go next? And that's a big question a lot of us are wondering this evening. Where does activism need to go next? And that's for Mandy or Brett or Harriet.
I'll get the ball rolling. I was sitting here thinking about something. When we started Southerners on New Ground and other organizations as well, you kind of were trying to figure big picture what would be things that you would have in common no matter where you lived, what language you spoke, or your ability. And if I were to go 5,000 feet up in the air, the things that I would think automatically would be these things: clean air, clean water. No one should be homeless. No one should be hungry. Everyone should have access to health care and education. If you think of those five, and you can make the list longer, but that's just been going on since day one. And I think the question would be, getting back to kind of all politics is local, how does that play out where people are who are on this call right now? You know, are you already involved in something? Are you aware of what's happening? But I only ask that because, for example, I don't read books, so I'm not about ready to join a book club. But if you ask me, does it matter if I can go outside and breathe some fresh air, or I can have some clean water, whatever? People can relate to that. And we have 100 counties in North Carolina. How many counties y'all have in South Carolina? What y'all got, whatever that might be?
46.
46, we have 100. But I was just trying to think, so if I had a neighbor, or if I'm trying to figure out who else I could be in contact with, no matter what the situation. I noticed someone thinking about, you know, if you're a youngin' or if you're an elder. Right now, what I have in common with some of the young population, I have a real fear of my home security and my food security. I only have Social Security live on right now. You know, I'm 72, but at the age of 17, I didn't worry about that. But if we can get all of the kind of cross different generational languages, cultures, and see those 5 or 6 things, then I'll open it up for what else might be in common. That to me is where you not only get the activism then, now, and going into the future, but how it's defined, where you want to make it work at. That's what excites me. And I have to tell you, there's also an intentionality. We have a thing called BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100. Automatically, if I can be invited, I'll show up. Always, if I can be. But what happens when you pass 35? What happens to those 36 years old, and where do they go? But I'm just trying to think about the intentionality and how would we be showing up in different places and in different spaces. So that would be one way I would think about, you know, what is activism then, what it is now, but also going forward in the most practical sense. What's the daily day-to-day practice that we do?
All right, and Harry, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to go ahead and give a response as well?
Well, there's been something that's been on my mind that I wanted to address, and I don't know if it's appropriate to do that. But right now, transgender people are really under fire in the worst way. And I think if you read the newspaper, you look at the news, you know what's going on. Not only being murdered, but there's so many people that do not understand transgender people, do not make an effort to try to understand them. So that to me is where so much focus needs to be put right now. I know that's maybe just a limited, thing that we have to work on, and when there are many others, but to me, right now, we all ought to be aware of that and try to do everything we can to help the transgender community. And there are many bills out there. There's many things you can write your legislator, call, whatever, locally, and, in every way. So we need to do that.
I had a real quick question. My mind's full. Dr. Greene, and also anyone, you can actually make a living. This could be a vocation to be an activist organizer, whether it's an LGBTQ, environmental justice, racial justice. I'm thinking that if you would want to make a living, because I get paid, other people get paid. So if you were thinking about whether you go to college or not, or the education, how would you like to put that into practice? So I'm just trying to think of anyone else on here. There's other people who are working for organizations. You hope this is a living wage, but that's the idea. And you have funders that are trying to fund people to do this advocacy full time. And so I think it would behoove us to start putting some information about where these organizations are. You're thinking about what the groups are. SEDC Social Justice Fellowship, Southern Partners Fund, if you name them. But I think there could be almost like what would you call it here? Sort of like a time and a place to figure out where you want to do that work. And it could be sustaining you for years, or, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but to be in partner. And also these community-based organizations are critical, local. Just putting that out there about that could be a way to make a living and make change at the same time.
Sorry, I don't want to like actually disagree with Mandy, but I want to point out a distinction between North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina's got 7 cities larger than the largest city in South Carolina. Their standard of living is much higher. And yeah, actually, the University of South Carolina cost about 6 times as much as the University of North Carolina with much less state money in it. So we are um, behind about 20 years. There's a benefit in being behind because we can learn from North Carolina. But it's really hard to get a job in South Carolina as an organizer. I can testify to that. And what we do in the Modjeska School is we recognize that. And what we want all of you to be is effective citizens. You can be an effective citizen. We try and teach people to understand that they're revolutionaries because they don't like the values that are the mainstream values. So you want to have what Dr. King called a revolution of values. So you can be a revolutionary, even if you're a school teacher, a bank clerk, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, etc. You can be an effective citizen. Now, if you want to really dive in and roll up your sleeves and get a job in organizing, call Mandy and get her to help you raise money, and we will do what we can. I gotcha. And that one of the things that we need to recognize is that there's a role for all of us, but what's lacking? The response nationally to the George Floyd killing was just so incredible, provocative on a world stage. What happened in Colombia was a mob because the organizers didn't have any base, they didn't have an organization. They just called actions. They got out of hand. We knew that would happen, and it got ugly. And so the difference between a mob and an army is organization, discipline. And so we need to do that. You got to maintain your outrage because if you're not outraged, there's not enough wrong. But you need to be able to have that played out with a strategic fashion, which takes some work, which is what the Modjeska School is about. Thank you, Robert.
Right, right. And I do see, I was asked in the chat, I know Lisa Williams has a quick comment. So Lisa, please go right ahead. And then we'll get back to the questions in a moment.
And I want to piggyback on something that was said earlier about everyone deserves. I'm a doctor of nursing practice by title, but by profession, I'm a family nurse practitioner. So I want to comment on the healthcare aspect of it and what we focus on, what we go through in South Carolina as far as healthcare. Healthcare has basically an F in South Carolina. And there are tools and resources that we have at our fingertips that we don't use because the system of patriarchy that we suffer from as a state for so many years has affected it. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I go to school, I get my education, I'm trained to the full scope of my practice, yet the patriarchal structure of South Carolina is such that I cannot use my education as a female unless I go to this, because our profession is 99% female. Medicine is 99% male. But in order to use my education and my degree, first generation college graduate, piled down with student loans, I still have to go to this profession that's not only 99% male, but 90% white male and say, hey, can you sign this paper so I can work? That stems from us living in a patriarchal society. And it doesn't only affect Black females, it affects anyone who is a family nurse practitioner who has earned their education. The reason why I'm saying that is because 1% of physicians go into primary care, yet we are trained fully to take on primary care, and we still don't have enough primary care providers. Why is that? Because medicine has so much more money than us that every time we go before the legislature to get more providers out there so that we as a state can have the providers that we need, we get knocked down. We don't have the public doesn't understand our education. They think we get 2 years of training. Nonsense. I went to 12 years of college. You know, I have a doctoral degree, had to write a dissertation, as well as I also had to do a clinical rotation hours. So we're highly trained, we're fully trained, yet we're suffering in healthcare because of this old patriarchal thing that exists that keeps us from practicing to the full scope of our practice. It was difficult. I am getting ready to open my own practice, but it took me a year to get someone to sign my paper to say, yeah, you can use your education and work on your own. It stops entrepreneurship. It stops a lot of things that we do. And it's just due to this old patriarchal law that's on there. I think if we want to increase healthcare in the state of South Carolina, if we want to get rid of diabetes, if we want to we need more primary care providers, and you have a slew of capable, highly trained, well-experienced nurse practitioners that are out there that can do it. That's one of the activisms that I would like to see change. But, we're talking about the same states who failed to ratify the ERA for years that are blocking our ability to practice at the full scope of our practice.
Dr. Williams, this is an excellent opportunity to point out that what you need, we all have to work on. We can't work on the question of healthcare without working on the question of the systemic patriarchal white racism that drives this state.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it's something that I wanted to say before, but I wasn't sure if it even fit into this conversation, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. I really do think that being hit with COVID-19 recently, if we would have had the providers out there, so many nurse practitioners, we're working in physicians' offices. We're working in there without physician supervision. They call them our supervisors, but really I can work in a practice by myself without a physician there. They don't have to check my charts. They don't have to do anything. It's just a signature on a piece of paper. I practiced for 10 years and never met my supervisor. That's it. But it keeps us from being able to practice to the full scope of our practice.
My sword is drawn. This is something that we had 39 people arrested blocking the entrance to the State House over the refusal to take Medicaid expansion. When we mailed thousands, we had 50,000 handouts with a picture of Dr. King, a picture of Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley saying, we didn't just say no to Medicaid expansion, we said never. And Dr. King saying, the greatest of all inequities is the injustice in healthcare in this country.
Yes, it is.
And so I agree with you. This should be a clarion call to the 250,000 people at least that are standing, outside emergency rooms, driving up our costs. So let's get together and work on this. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Brett, let me apologize, everybody, for my low bandwidth on my computer here. I don't know what's going on where I keep going in and out, but I've been listening to everybody periodically. So I just wanted to let everybody know. Did you hear that?
No, you're kind of going in and out once again. So yeah, try it one more time, please. Yeah.
Turn off your video, Kevin, and just do the audio and you'll get better.
Yeah, let me try turning off the video. Yeah. Let's see if that does better. But my computer's been unstable pretty much all. I've been trying to work with it. It goes on and off. Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Now?
Yes.
And there you go. I hate that I'm missing this. I hate that I'm missing this conversation because from what I
Not working.
Well, there goes Kevin again. He's not feeding that squirrel in his cage enough. Dr. Greene, I guess.
Oh, right. So, okay. So we'll wait for Kevin to get back. I do want to get to the next question in chat because there are a lot of good questions in the chat this evening. One is on the question of allyship. Deborah asked a question. I'd love to hear perspectives on allyship, being an ally. What does it mean, and what's really needed when it comes to being an ally?
You mind if I reverse it? And I wonder what she thinks what an ally is, I'm just curious. What do you think? Deborah, is that the person who asked?
Deborah,
I had a feeling
Yes.
you were going to say that.
Yes.
I had a feeling somebody was going to say that. I mean, I feel like what's out there in terms of being an ally is recognizing one's privilege, using that privilege in ways that will truly push forward, push away barriers and push forward society as a whole. The way that I see that played out sometimes, I think to really be an ally requires humility, and it requires which goes hand in hand with the ability to say, I've got certain resources, I've got my experience, I've got my identity, and I can share all of that, but I'm not the person that needs to be or even should be out front, right? having the loudest voice, having the face on the poster, whatever that is. It's that not just ability, it's that need to step back. And that's the part that I think is really challenging for our movements overall, and that term of allyship. So it's way more than, putting the posts on Facebook and showing up, as many of you have said, just to the marches and such. It's a verb, it's not a noun. So anyhow, so I'm just going to stop there. That's but I'm really interested to see what you all think.
Thank you for that, Deborah. Yeah, good. And I'm wondering if other people, just not only us on here who are the initial yackers, but other people have an idea what they think an ally is. I'm just curious. Besides us.
Okay, I'll take that one. Can you hear me? Am I on mute?
We can hear you, yes.
I'm an ally, and I never thought in a million years that I would be one of the people in the forefront of this movement. But I was speaking for people who could not come out and speak for themselves. They would lose their job. They may be kicked out of their families. So many terrible things might happen to them. So it just, and there were some people that were out, but were not able to, maybe they didn't know how or didn't, couldn't lead the movement. So I didn't really realize that I was going to be in that position because and I've always given credit to it. I have supported the LGBT community, but I never wanted to be the person. I always wanted to just speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. And I think that's what an ally can do from time to time, is to speak for others who, for whatever reason, and it's certainly true in the LGBT community, especially back in the 80s, that somebody had to speak for most of them. And that's what I think an ally is.
I have a follow-up question, and this is interesting when I think of the word ally. I'm trying to think of the idea, like this might happen to everybody. You're just going about your business. I don't care if you're in college, if you're in school, you're walking around and you hear a sexist comment or a homophobic comment. Do you say anything? There's this great quote, silence is the voice of complicity. If you hear something and then say nothing, and no one hears you having any other option, they might think, well, then you must be just going along to be going along. I think about that on a very practical day-to-day. But I have one that I want to go back to when I talked about that walk that we did from Mount Olive to Raleigh, North Carolina. What I was really struck by, because I speak English, and even though I'm Black, I speak English. So to be in that position of where they were having those meetings with only in Spanish, and I had to have the interpreter going from Spanish to English, that was humbling for me. But it also talks about this idea about, what do you talk about justice? Like we talk about language justice. So however you might do your language, also ability, ASL or sign language, or people who do English interpretation, like when you do these things as well. So, and I just wonder, and I'll end with this, we have a thing here in Durham called Social Justice Story Time. Social Justice Story Time is when you have babies that are 0 to 5 years old, and they'll bring up a topic. How do you tell a 4-year-old about language justice? How do you tell a 4-year-old about food justice? Or how do you tell a 3-year-old about gay, lesbian, bi? If you have to figure out how you would say it or find some way to interpret it, that's amazing to me, because I just wonder, at what age do you start to be really imprinted on, like, do you think anyone's born racist or homophobic? I don't think they are, but where do you get that? How does that happen? And how young do you go? So it's just exciting to me about how people can be the counter. Like, here are some of the ways we can address it, talk about it in an intentional kind of way. But I just wonder that thing about silence is the voice of complicity. When you hear a homophobic comment or a racist or a sexist, you hear it. Do you say anything, or do you just be quiet? It's like, not me. I'm not going to be wanting to intervene on that. But that would be another example of what an ally would be. Exactly, also what you just shared to us, Harriet, as well.
That's all really, really important here. And I think this question of allyship is one that, again, ties back to this broader point about identity politics and what that particular term means in the here and now. And actually, what I want to do now is the next question in the chat, I'm going to let Amber ask the question herself, because she has a really important series of questions about the actual nuts and bolts of organizing that I think is also important to get to. So Amber, if you don't mind, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your questions, please.
Hello. I just want to thank you all for your words of wisdom. First of all, I'm enjoying this conversation. But my question is, as a person starting to get into organizing, have you and thinking about these vast big projects, I was wondering, did you all ever experience any anxiety or any anxious moments when first starting? How did you gauge like the development of the organizing as far as knowing the timing? When did you know, hey, it's time to, you know, put my studying into use, into practices? I was wondering, how did you all like figure out those moments?
Just start off by saying presumption is a necessary attribute of a revolutionary.
All right, now explain that one, Brad.
That you can't be afraid to step up and speak out, period. Boom.
Kevin?
You know, my computer's working all of a sudden, right, Brad? You know, and sometimes life and the life you lead makes you organized. What you experience make you organized. What occurs with you, your family, and your friends, and what's going on around you make you organized. It's sometimes it can be spontaneous. Now there are tools to organize when you're trying to reach an objective. But and Brett, you know, you were talking about Nikki Haley and refusing to sign Medicare expansion, and we've been talking about the possible lawsuit I might file with the city, where the policeman stops me and gets into court. And this happened to us in 2014 when we went out there in front of the State House. And what that police officer that arrested all of us back in 2014 got in court and said why he stopped me 3 days after the George Floyd protest here in South Carolina. He said, you were obstructing traffic. Now, I got to thinking about that, Brett, and we've talked about it. And you know, the George Floyd killings and that what goes on with Black men and Black people and people of color and policing all around this country. And I said, well, you know what? This cop who's been on the force for years and years stopped me for basically running a green light, gave me a 4-point ticket in a predominantly Black area, which raises my insurance, which raises the insurance of the people around us, which to me said, well, who gets all that money? The city benefits from the tickets. We have a majority Black city and county council, but fundamentally, redlining is paying for the operation of city government. Well, for me, that was an organizing moment. That means I got to get out there and organize against structural and systemic racism on the backs of poor and Black people that happen to people every day. Sometimes that's how organizing happens. You might do all the studying and read all the books, but sometimes life will happen to you or your family or your friends or the people you love, and then you get to stepping.
Good.
That's all I got. I'm sorry.
Hey, Amber.
Yes.
Are you thinking about wanting to do it? Are you doing it now? I mean, do you have some from your end, you want to share some of your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so I recently came back. I'm a Lancaster native, and I recently came back from being in New York for a while. And I lived here all my life, but and I've always stood up, like when I was in classes and stuff like that. When someone said something racist, I was always that person that was like, oh, here she go. Like, you know, like I was that person in the class. But I've been thinking of, I don't want to be so reactionary anymore. I want to create sustainable institutions and spaces so it can last for generations. So now I'm thinking about generations instead of thinking about the moment necessarily. And so that's why I've been trying to get involved. I want to create a cultural space for African Americans here in an archive because there's a lack of historic preservation here. And I feel like there'll be a great opportunity to broaden out into doing programming and other activists, like more initiatives that will help develop the African American community here in Lancaster County. So I've been I haven't been here for a while. So I've been trying to just network and going to different meetings and going to and being involved in the historical commission and just going to city council and getting to know some of these people. And I know the people of the community, but they know me as little old Amber. They don't know me as grown adult Amber trying to do work in the community. So I'm just trying to figure out some more sustainable practices so I can make a lasting change. So sometimes it gets overwhelming a little bit, you know, because you have all these big ideas. I have all these big ideas in my mind. And I'm like, okay, when's it time for me not to study so much? Or when's it time for me to say something? Or when's it time for me to act? Or am I moving too slow? So those are just some of the things that go in my mind.
Well, I have some good news for you. Southerners on New Ground does interns and fellowships. Robert-John, how could there be some way to get Amber involved in some of that? South Carolina.
For sure. There's two things. One, Amber, I wanted to address part of your question was around anxiety. So to recognize that it's real. As humans, we experienced it and it always will be there. No matter, I was anxious before I came on this call, and I do calls all day, every day. So that's a real thing and that's okay. Also think that there's all kind of roles for organizing, all kind of roles to being, an activist and abolitionist that isn't always frontline. You don't have to be the poster person, right? There's all kind of ways that we build because we're a holistic movement. There's all kind of ways we can connect. And I think Amari made a comment that it's not always safe for folks to be out or to be that poster person. And that's real. And I think taking into account the spaces that you're in and the environments you're in to make it happen. Now, going back to first thing that comes to mind is Amber, you need to come to our Sunday song chapter meetings. We do it on Zoom. Everybody should be coming. It's hot. It's the place to be. But we do a great deal of talking about those. And we have a number of fellowship programs with the Lord's Work. That's Audrey Lord and Work WERQ, because, we fly like that. The Black Fellowships, Black August. There's a lot of fellow space where we help to build up around the movement work, whether it's language justice, just to build a political education. And I also wanted to address in the chat, I think a complication around what it means to have political education. And political education isn't coming to you to change you, to make you polished or more professional. That is very elitist. What we're talking about when we come through with political education is giving a historical movement, talking about what we've done, how we're doing it, how we're thinking about doing it, and folks have written about it. And we're just learning together as an opportunity for us to grow. So it's not about changing you because you come as you are and we're just meeting you at the table. And if there isn't a table there, then let's build it. Then that's what we're about. So Amber, we're gonna connect because I got you. And finding those spaces, a lot of your questions was about timing and frame. Those are all the nuance in the moment. Right now it's about getting grounded, figuring out, you already know what you want, the archive, right? We want to preserve AA history. How can we go about it? That's already there. Then we build a campaign out from that. See, you got me working. You got me thinking. So that's how we do it, and we'll figure that out. So that's real, and I'm glad that you bringing that in. I'm glad you're back in Lancaster because we need you here.
And Robert-John, we've been working with Amber. Amber's a student at the Modjeska School, and so
Hey, Brad.
We'll share.
Hey, Brett, and anytime Amber wants to come over here by Railroad Barbecue, we do an archive over here, and I have several historical archives and stuff about people all over South Carolina and all the organizing that's taking place. And actually, we're trying to expand what we're doing down here. We might get another building so that we can bring more information and expand the archives that we have here.
Oh, that's fantastic. And by the way, as a historian, let me just say I'm glad that all of you are talking about historic preservation and historic archives, because we need to make sure folks are aware of what has happened in South Carolina and what continues to happen here today, because I am sick and tired of historians saying, oh, nothing ever happened in South Carolina. That's absolute nonsense. All right. And just want to keep folks honest, as a historian, this is what I hear all the time. But I do, again, I'm glad folks are really participating in this discussion, because I think the questions we've gotten this evening so far have been really useful questions about activism and organizing, because I know folks have been wondering about this for weeks now. And I wanted, there's another question. Okay, so Ryan Curie had a really interesting question to chat from about 30 minutes ago. And Ryan, I want you to go ahead and pose your question directly to the panelists, to the rest of the group here this evening, because I think it's a really important one too.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. I appreciate it. I just wanted to say how enormously grateful I am to hear from this panel, because I'm currently in the early stages of co-founding a PFLAG chapter here in the Georgetown, Pawleys Island area. It's been, we've been motivated by a kind of local crisis that is in our high school with teen suicide, self-harm, substance abuse, kids being kicked out of their homes. It's really, I mean, crisis is not an overstatement. It really is an emergency, we feel like. So we've proceeded along two prongs. First is to organize this PFLAG group, and the kids themselves, the high school students, have joined together and have started meeting weekly in a kind of breakfast club. They meet at the Waffle House in the afternoons just to share time together in community. So my question is, are there particular lessons for building up young people who are just kind of understanding their identities for themselves, or figuring those identities out and growing into them? Thank you.
I would like to go ahead and address that, if I may.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I think that the National Organization of Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays can be of great help to you. I don't know if you've contacted them at all yet. Have you done that?
Yes, we have. We've begun our work with the national organization.
Okay, well, the local PFLAG groups, of course, we've all been on, the COVID calendar, so we haven't been meeting or anything, but we've been trying to handle things as we could. But I'm sure the Columbia chapter and the president and whoever would be glad to help you in any way that we can. And you can get my information from Progressive Network. And I'll be glad to help you or advise you in any way I can.
Thank you.
Hey, Ryan, I was going to, and this is Mandy, typical, I'll ask you back. When you think of PFLAG, and are these high school students, like what's the ages of the youth, if I can, is that okay to use that term? What's the ages of the youth? And
Sure. So the youth that we're mainly working with now are high school students.
Okay, so that'd be what? Freshmen going up to senior, like what, 16, right? So, and maybe this is a rhetorical question for anyone. What we had an issue here, we had a PFLAG chapter, and Harriet, you and other people can relate to this, but the people who were running it really wanted to be the ones who really, really, really wanted to run it, even though they knew the youth had to. So how do you make sure that there is a real equitable, people are really getting their voices in and their thoughts and feelings without feeling like they either have to ask for it or actually go around? I think this happens. It happens with a lot of organizations. And we had one where the people who started it, they wouldn't, like, it was founder syndrome. They didn't know how to step aside. So anyone coming into it would make a difference. But here's the other one I'm intrigued by. Here in North Carolina, with our public school systems, the number of Latino, Muslim, other diversity of youth, some of them might not identify as LGBT, but they want to be allies. And they're wondering, am I welcome here? How would they know that they could be welcome? They're not that. We have some PFLAG chapters now who only do things in Latin, Latin, or if they're Black. I mean, there's the uniqueness of the families, the parents and friends, and a lot of that just has to do with your geography. But have you run into anything like someone like, well, it's youth, but we're going to run everything? I don't know if I'm being overly hyper on that, but have you sensed that at all, or issues, or yeah?
That's exactly right. I mean, we chose these two prongs. We kind of discerned this two-pronged approach because we realized that we didn't want to get in the way of what the youth were doing themselves for themselves. And what we thought we could do in starting PFLAG was, in a way, change hearts and minds. That's the same language that we use all the time. So I love hearing you say that. To change hearts and minds in our local community, our churches, our school system, the leadership in the community, so that we could do that and provide some cover and some support for the youth who are trying to do this for themselves.
The Harriet Hancock Center has had a youth group for a long time. And whenever we have an issue of people coming to PFLAG or calling PFLAG for that kind of help about youth, we always refer the youth to the, so we've not had to deal with that issue, but I can understand that it's a little tricky, I'm sure.
Yeah, the national organization has been really helpful with that as well. So it's just something that we're keeping in the forefront of our mind. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
And thank you for such an important and wonderful question. I think that's, again, I think one thing that I'm seeing really happen in the chat and also with tonight's conversation is, how do we meet people where they are in terms of their identities, in terms of their own political philosophies, in terms of their own organizing skills, in terms of their own knowledge, so that's, again, a big part of organizing as well. Let's see, we've got a few more questions in the chat, and we are running up against our limit again. We're going to be done at around 8:30 this evening. Okay, so now Amber had a second question in the chat. I think we didn't quite get to with her first question, but she asked, could you expound upon sustainable community development practices? If anyone wants to chime in there. And Amber, if you want, you can spell out that question a bit more for the audience here.
Okay, I'll explain a little bit more. I'll explain more. So just developing a sense of, see, I wrote something, I'm trying to explain it. Like when I say community development, so just creating community amongst people that are like-minded, I would say, and just trying to have practices that will sustain that sense of community or that space. So I guess that I understand that there's like a large, like when I was in New York, there was a large like my friend, I was an ally of the LGBTQ plus community, and they just had like a really big sustainable community spaces, and I was just wondering, how do you, of like-minded individuals and allies, so I was wondering, how do you create those same spaces maybe in smaller communities who have not yet developed, and how to make that sustainable, if that makes sense. I'm sorry.
Well, you're not speaking about community as in geographic or just being in one spot.
Yeah.
Or let's say the Black community and it's limited to a geographical area. You're talking about something broader, right?
Right, I would say that too, but also like within the geographical space too. I can expound upon my own community. It's very small, and again, like I said, I haven't been here for so long, and I don't know how to reach everyone yet. So how do I go on the ground and then also, like create a sustainable place? Like, what is it, through community conversations or any type of programming? Or, I talk to people every day, but, like, I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm listening to the conversation tonight, which has been great. And I do think that a lot is about the foundation of our movement, and the foundation of our movement being about justice and what that is, and how to create an environment that's just for everyone, regardless of how they define themselves, unless they're defining themselves as someone that wants to kill you. Now, that's a whole different thing. But, what is community, and what is economic sustainability in a community? Here we are in South Carolina. We live in a metropolis. In most cities, people are being pushed out, people of color, due to corporatism and a lot of different things. But so, the idea of what is community has to be broader than a geographical space. It means that we believe what we believe, and we believe it enough that we share it, that we oppose people trying to denigrate it, and that even in the spaces that we occupy geographically, that we maintain our self-justice and what we believe in are in those particular geographical spaces, and everything else as it relates to organizing politically and trying to achieve something politically through organizing. That's something different. But in the things that we believe, and fundamentally we believe in justice, that is, I think, where we set our foundation.
And I was, Kevin, I'm curious about this question too, because here's the other reality check with COVID. There ain't a whole lot of folk meeting in person. In fact, I would venture to say that I've been on meetings where there's been more people showing up on this if we actually had an in-person meeting. But I want to maybe pose a question. it's almost like all you know is all you know. I mean, I was talking to some friends of mine and someone said, well, if I would ask this question right now without getting too deep, but at what point did each one of us, if we go back in our mind and think about, at what point did I realize something was different, whether it was good or bad? Like, you know, I didn't know that. And all of a sudden, had it not been for some situation that would have been, for instance, when we were organizing, the Southerners on New Ground started this wonderful campaign called Black Mama's Bailout Project. We would literally raise money for sisters and sitting in that jail, to, you know, just like a ticket or something, or couldn't pay the rent, whatever. We would gather enough money, but we would have it done specifically. So on Mother's Day, it would be, they would all get out. We would have a big food thing. People would share stories and whatever, but we raised money because some of those same women that were sitting in those jails are now working on the Black Mama's Bailout Project. It was just an idea. And I wondered, I also wonder when things happen, it usually starts with, what if we were to try this? Or what about if we were to try that? But can I really be practical? Unless you have a why, a where, a when, and practically something doable that you can actually accomplish, that might help. The War Resisters League is almost 100 years old. So for them to say, we believe all wars is a crime against humanity, we're going to stop all war. Well, hello? And whose lifetime is that going to happen? But if you say that right now, like in high schools or wherever it might be, and you really wanted to have someone question whether or not you have to have an ROTC or some other military thing, or even on a positive way, you want to start a really neat group, you might want to have something that's doable, tangible, but also have a way that you can invite people. When I was sitting in Santa Rita jail, I was the only Black woman arrested out of, like, you know, maybe 50 white women. Had not one of those white women come over to me, Jane Shulman, and said, Mandy, we're going to have a War Resisters League potluck. Would you like to go? I never would have gone. I never would have had that be a part of my life now with the war. But that could have been any invite. Was anyone extend the invitation? How would you know where to go? And here's the other one. Are we only looking at the people we already know? When I moved to Durham, North Carolina, the first thing I said is, where the Black folk meet here? Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People. When do you meet? Can I come? Yes, you might. I mean, name whatever it is, but I just wonder if we have our own little world. It's our own little group that everyone knows, no shade, but we're trying to think who else can also have an influence on outside the universe, and then extending the invite, but also doable, practical. And quite honestly, I'm thinking now, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, even in South Carolina, you can now go in, if you're a freshman, you can get credit for being involved in some kind of community event or an organization, even getting your step and your toe in that, in terms of what that might be, whether it's a county or a city or rural. If we take advantage of it, you know, community colleges, technical schools, or even environmental groups. But I just wonder if we can see outside our usual, you know, circle you ever have. Like, Kevin, I have to get back down there to get to that restaurant y'all have down there and see what's going on there.
Your picture is on the wall.
It's on the wall. There you go. But one final,
Harriet's picture's on the wall.
I'm looking at behind you. But the other one, I want to ask this. I think it's a two-way street, though. I think if I'm an elder and I want to extend the invitation and tell everyone you are welcome, there's got to be a way that I can do that. But that goes the other way too. If there's youth or anyone younger than me, I used to be 17 once. How would I know that I'm invited? How would I know I'm welcome? So there needs to be some kind of wonderful, what would you call that? Kind of like a universe of, hey, y'all, here we
like
are.
The Rainbow Coalition.
There you go.
It's like what the Rainbow Coalition sought out to do, a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-gender coalition building entity. And even when I met Brett in the late 70s, early 80s, I met Brett, and what attracted me to Brett's organization was the name of it was GROW. And my brother and I started an organization called Wake Up. And back in the day, it was Wake Up and Grow. And so, you know, you reach people where they are, but still you have to have some foundation that you're both in it for the right thing. And that, for me, that thing is justice.
It helps if it's fun too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Amber, use culture, fun, get people together just to share concerns. Don't feel you got to start with a plan to solve things. Get together with people that share a problem.
And you're not going to save the world in a week either. It's an evolution as much as a revolution.
But I certainly love her enthusiasm.
Oh, yeah.
And see, this is exactly why this kind of conversation is so valuable and so important, to get different generations of folks really talking to each other about these big issues. And speaking of big issues, there's another question in the chat I want to get to real quick. And I think Brett might especially have an answer for this. Jerry Dean Pate pointed out, when will we make gerrymandering a main issue? And I know that Brett's certainly been working on that to an extent, others have too. So I know that earlier in this evening's conversation, Mandy and Robert-John both pointed out the importance of voting, pulling the voting lever, that kind of thing. So if you guys want to chime in a bit on the problem of gerrymandering and what you're doing about that right now, what you're thinking about doing about that right now, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Well, Jerry, I'm sorry to tell you that we're screwed. That the game is so rigged, so well, for so long, that we ain't going to unrig it easily. If the Supreme Court's not going to save us, and they said they're not, we have to expect the Republican majority to give up power, and they're not. So it's really up to us. And we've got the Progressive Network at fairmaps.com, fairmapssc.com. I'll put that in the chat. We have a long game that it's going to take, hopefully not as long as it's taken to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed in South Carolina, which I may point out it hasn't passed, but that we've got to have a plan, a ground game, and that we're hoping that we can help Song with the work that they're doing and putting some people in the field to look at the places that we can actually make a difference, which are going to be on local races. The legislative races are so rigged that all we could possibly do is change the butt that's in the seat. We've got between 42 and 44 Democrats in the House, period. Everything you could possibly do in this redistricting, you might gain one, two seats. I don't think so. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle when the winners get to make the rules. And so we introduced legislation in 2018 for Citizens Redistricting Commission that would take the power away from the legislature. That's going to take a major movement to force that onto the ballot. The only states that have actually taken the power away from the legislature have the ability to take up petitions statewide and put something on the ballot. 27 states, including South Carolina, do not have that power. So go to fairmapssc.com and see this long-range game plan. And in the meantime, stay tuned, and you'll be hearing things that you can do in your community to be able to utilize what's left of the Voting Rights Act. We lost Section 5 in 2013. Post-racial, we had a black president, so we're not racist anymore. And so we don't have the opportunity to vet what changes they make before they make them. We can only litigate after they make them. So what we have to do is gather data. This is the first redistricting since black people could vote in this state that we don't have the protection, which has never been very good, of the Voting Rights Act.
Brett, let me ask you a question.
We've got some plans.
Brett, how do we make it a public issue? Okay. This thing, we've got legislators who don't want to talk about this. And I'm not talking about Republicans, okay?
You're talking about the Democrats will save
The
seats.
South got flipped by Lee Atwater, and African-American Democrats gave the Republicans power, and no one wants to call them out. The House has passed you don't have to have a license to carry a firearm now, okay? Ridiculous stuff. And guess why that happened? Because the vote in the House is 46 to 76. So the Republicans run right over them, and nobody, oh no, we don't want to talk about that.
Well, now, I want to ask the question, Brett, who's in the room during redistricting? It used to be that it was our fair share and the NAACP. And
I know that, Kevin, I understand that, but nobody's raising any hell about that, okay? Nobody wants to talk about the numbers. You got it in North Carolina, you got it in South Carolina, you got it in Georgia. You got the same thing of Republicans rolling over Democrats, and Democrats appear to be okay with that.
Well,
because they
Jerry,
like representing people that look like themselves. And Lee Atwater was the brainchild of this
Jerry,
thing.
we could take up the rest of the evening talking about this, but
I
let's
know,
have a
but
meeting on redistricting because we've got a little time to figure out a game plan. And what we need to do is to wage a struggle that may not win, but it needs to let people understand why we lost and what we can do about
yes,
it. And
yes.
so
Can I
we've got some plans.
Please make
Mandy?
it an issue though, because nobody wants to talk about that.
can I
Apparently,
can I talk about the success of this in the state of North Carolina, however, just to give you an
yes.
idea? And this is the
You're doing
reality
some
check.
stuff. You're
Right.
doing stuff there, man.
But this would be good to really think about going forward, 2021, 22, and moving forward, how we do some of this, multi-state thing. We had gerrymandering here. And you want to know why? Because after Obama got elected in the midterm, no one turned out to vote, and all the Republicans did. We lost it for 10 years. And the only reason why that got turned around, because now we have a Democrat governor, we have a Democrat Secretary of State, we have a Democrat, but also on the local level, I'll get back to this. We're going to get a 14th congressional district in the state of North Carolina if this upcoming election. Since we know that, but where are people moving from? So anyone who moves to the state of North Carolina, the second they move here, there has to be a systematic way. Welcome to the state of North Carolina. Here's the information you need to know who's in your city, your county, your state, and you have to vote. In 2022, every single member of the North Carolina General Assembly is up for re-election. In 2022, every member of the US House is up for re-election. How are they voting? Do we know? That $1,400 check I got, that made a difference. Not one Republican voted for it. You don't think I'm going to forget that? But it's also local, really local. So the NAACP now, Mahente, name that voter coalition to me is really could make a difference. Now we got it back. It just went back to what it was when I moved here. I have David Price as my member. They put me out here in Tarboro, North Carolina. Tarboro, that's 3 hours from where I live. This is the thing to remember. Be careful what you ask for. That was 90% Black folk. Be careful be careful of what you're going to get. But that needs to be a multiracial, multi-generational effort all across the board. 18, the second you get 18, you should be all ready to vote, and you should have that right. But I just wonder how aggressive we can be on this thing to really make a difference. And one final thing, by 2050, if not sooner, demographics. Why do you think all this stuff is happening? By 2050, this country will be majority people of color. Women are the numerical majority. What happened in Georgia? Look at the coalition that made that happen down there. That can happen. I'm not going to give up on y'all. We'll come down and save you down in South Carolina if we can do it.
We don't come down saving nobody. Listen,
Jerry, what it's going to take is people coming to save us because North Carolina, I've been in the trench for a long time, and I know groups in North Carolina. There are multiple groups that are doing individual elements of what we've been trying to do with no money for decades.
Yeah.
And that we are not a battleground state, so we have not gotten the attention and the funding that North Carolina has. Gilda Cobb Hunter, when she helped found the Progressive Network in 1994, has been with us the whole time. We have really cutting edge stuff. We don't get covered. Gilda said we didn't set out to be a secret society. We just don't get any ink. Yeah. We don't have the money to have the staff to be able to move the game. We've got a good game. We can't move the game. So we need your help to figure out how we can generate the enthusiasm that we need from the leadership in this state by putting fire under their butt to do something. And so this is another Zoom, folks, that we'll have about redistricting soon.
Yeah, we need to have this conversation because Brad, you get outside help, and I've existed in this state on outside help, but ain't nobody gonna save us but us. And a lot of this has to do with organizing. And I'm hearing young folk tonight, and everything y'all are talking about doing revolves around organizing, and not just organizing online and not just talking about it, but doing consistent public education and not counting on somebody else's ink to tell your story. That's about organizing county by county. And those organizations that fell by the wayside after Barack Obama got elected, because we had a Black president and everything was all good. But everything died, from the Black press to the progressive press to progressive organizations to Black organizations or whatever. From what I see, we have to rebuild those organizations and go back and do the public education and political education that needs to be done. And we need to be in those rooms when they're redrawing those lines. And the NAACP in this state, which isn't anything like it used to be, or the ACLU, which isn't anything like it used to be, either they can step up, but they need to step up beside these young people that need to be in those meetings and make sure that we're covered.
All right, then. I mean, I think that's a good place for us to, well, I said in the chat, amen, Kevin, indeed. And I think everyone this evening has said a lot of really important things. And I just want to very quickly remind folks that today, of course, is a great day in South Carolina. It is, of course, Confederate Memorial Day. I cannot think of a better group of folks to spend Confederate Memorial Day with than all of you. Ironically, today is May 10th. It's also the anniversary of the passage of the Negro Act in 1740, which forbade allowing slaves to write, to read and write and all that stuff. So I'm sure no one in the state government thought about that when they created Confederate Memorial Day, or as I like to call it, Second Place Day. All right, so with all that being said, again, at 8:30, of course, if folks want to stay around and talk to each other for a bit longer to get to know each other a bit better, we can certainly do that. There'll be a brief musical interlude. Just a reminder for folks from Justice School, we are having, of course, our next class, Class 6, next week, where we'll have several guest speakers, and we'll be talking about the history of this state from roughly 1969 through 1996, really talking about the formation of GROW, and ending with the formation of the South Carolina Progressive Network, and talking about some of the activist struggles that were actually mentioned in this deeper dive session this evening. Again, I wanted to thank all of our guests this evening, Mandy, Harriet, Robert-John, Kevin, for giving us such rich and informative insight into what it means to be activists and organizers and fighters for justice and freedom in this state for so long. So again, please, everyone give them applause, whether it's virtual or real. Unmute yourselves and applaud them, because this was absolutely fantastic. Brett, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we need a sustained applause for Dr. Robert Greene II, because he's an amazing man. Amazing man.
Yeah, Dr. Greene.
And again, as a historian, please save your stuff. Archive your stuff. I'm urging all of you, please.
And so I'm really sorry that what we're missing in our Modjeska School is getting able to hang out after class and get to know each other some. So we've designed a little 30-minute interlude here, and we're going to take a musical break, and you can go off and do what you need to do and come back if you want to chat with people and get to know each other better. So thank you, Dr. Greene. Thank you, all the panelists, and stay tuned.